It's hard enough when you, a mature adult, have to deal with the trauma associated with your spouse's sexual betrayal. But how does a broken wife help her children navigate their own recovery journey? Hi, I'm Kim Poland, founder of Hope for Spouses, and welcome to this week's episode of Lunchtime Live. For those of you who are new to our ministry, I started Hope for Spouses after my husband and I came back together after a 4-year separation due to his adultery. And during that time, I really just focused on my own healing with the scriptures and really gathering around myself a safe circle of others to help me to be able to do that. And while I worked on me and God worked on me, God also worked on my husband and really helped him to be changed and transformed. And we've been back together now for a little over 4.5 years, and we have an incredible marriage, very intimate, emotionally, spiritually, and we know that really it's because God is at the center of it. Now today we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Natalie Ludwig. Welcome, Natalie. Glad you're here. And Natalie is also a mom who has been through the tragedy of having to deal with a broken relationship, a broken marriage, and she also has children. But the cool thing is Natalie's also a professional counselor. And I'm gonna let her introduce herself, and we're gonna talk to her about this topic of how do we help our kids navigate. So Natalie, why don't you give us a little information about yourself?
Okay, hi, I'm Natalie Ludwig, and currently I am divorced because we did have a 15-year marriage, and although similar to Kim at some point, I really pulled the focus into my own healing and well-being, and unfortunately in my case, simultaneously, he was not working on himself and made different decisions that really made our marriage and our home life go from bad to worse increasingly. And all that kind of comes with that package. And I don't know if I said this already, but my professional training is I'm an LCSWR, that's a licensed mental health professional. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a master practitioner of NLP and timeline therapy and hypnotherapy, a bunch of things. But despite all of that, none of it incubated me or protected me from dealing with my own crises. And that's part of also the shame I had to work through and the pain that I had to work through, because it's sort of people's ideal fantasy in the back of their mind that if they were a mental health therapist and had all these fancy tools, that somehow they'd have been able to solve the problem. Right. In their marriage. And, you know, if you're a therapist, I think people's expectation is that you have this amazing white picket fence marriage, this idyllic situation, and your kids are well behaved and perfect, and your husband loves you, and and none of that, unfortunately, was the case for me. Yeah. Not only did he continue to grow in his sinfulness in terms of his sexual betrayal of me and of God and his own body, but all of that came with the package of him being increasingly dark, for lack of a better word, very angry and rageful all the time and outright abusive. And the emotional abuse also carried over into physical altercations between us. And there were multiple times in which I had to call police, have orders of protection. We went through the whole gamut. We had in-house separations, out-of-house separations, temporary ones, longer ones, all kinds of ones, until eventually we truly, completely separated. And he had to move out altogether and find a place to live, no longer even staying with friends and things. And at that point, naturally, we really had to tell the kids, whereas for the most part, we had tried to keep the kids' awareness of the level of disarray of our marriage at bay. Right. So that really opened the door for everything that happened next in terms of dealing more head on with the issues that affected the children and all of that.
Yeah. And there were quite a few consequences from this within your marriage. I know that you share with me even like how it affected your work and your job and your own home. Can you share some of that as well, some of the consequences because of this?
Yeah, there were so many. I mean, it pulled so much focus for me to have to constantly attend to his needs and what's going on with him, and how to walk right and talk right and move right to not upset him, so that I wasn't, so that I was supposedly doing my part and managing his felt stress. All of that pulled so much stress and time and focus. I couldn't really focus as much as I needed to. I would say that I was still doing my job for the most part, but I couldn't really go beyond that.
Right.
And in my profession, there are different levels of licensing. And so for a long time, way too long in retrospect, but I suppose just right also in retrospect, I couldn't move forward to the next level of licensing because it meant that I had to really focus on studying and relearning and cramming all this material for this really expensive, difficult test, which, praise God, at this point I passed and I'm at the highest level of license in my field. But all of the stress, the drama, the tension really pulled a lot of focus and resources, energy-wise, time-wise, money-wise. At some point, he lost his job because of his impurity. A combination of factors led us to lose our house as well. So to lose our housing, to lose our, I don't know, a lot of things, like our social standing. It was,
Right.
We married as disciples, as Christians, and the ideal was to be this powerhouse Christian couple and seek and save the lost together and, help others in that way. And none of that was the reality. We couldn't even co-teach, without there being such aggression and disarray. So it really came with a whole lot of losses, personally, professionally, economically, logistically, every which way imaginable.
Yeah. So how did you find your way to health? I mean, I know part of it was, I'm sure you incorporated some of your counseling in there, but you personally, how did you get to a point where, like, now there's definitely some more stability there in your life, but how did you walk that way spiritually?
It was definitely rough. I'm not gonna lie, even though I was already Christian for how many years and a mental health therapist for however many years, it was still truly something that just sucks the life out of you. It feels like it blindsides you, even though it happened in stages. And I really had to figure out in a different way, in a deeper way, what it meant to pray, what it meant to really pray, not just talk to God like I'm having a regular conversation, but really go so much deeper than that I really felt a spiritual shift as I would pray.
Yes.
I began fasting, not just no longer for him and his repentance and his purity, but my own sanity. Because in all honesty, there were times where I felt like I was insane. Like I literally lost my mind, became very rageful and had fits of rage that were not only unbecoming of a Christian adult woman, but just so out of rapport with my own spirit, my own self.
Yeah.
So a lot of prayer, a lot of fasting, a lot of looking at scriptures. And even that, I had to really be mindful of what I was studying out. And studied out things that, I think that things that helped me were like Psalm, I think it's 73, really helped me deal with the resentment issues. I felt like, I guess on some level I felt like I was owed this Christian marriage, because I did do things the way that God wanted me to do.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. Like there's an expectation here. I did what I was supposed to.
I mean,
God, why is this working out this way? Yeah.
Isn't it real? And it's like, why is it that other sisters get married in the church and they have what it was that I wanted?
Right.
It's not that I wanted a perfect marriage, but I at least wanted to feel loved. Was that too much to ask?
Right.
Could I at least have had someone that was halfway decent? Even if he still had his flaws and sins, I just wanted it to be a real marriage, for lack of a better description.
Right.
And it really made me struggle and feel like did God just have it out for me? Did he not like me as much as he liked these other sisters? So Psalm 73 helped me a lot with that. Just working through it and realizing there were so many Psalms where people were working through their feelings.
Yes,
where
absolutely.
They were starting out with what their gripe was with God, and then eventually they'd shift gears and be able to find a place of peace and wholeness and depth. So I studied Psalms a lot. I studied Lamentations. I know that probably sounds morbid, but I think
we were
for a
lamenting
while,
for sure.
I just needed to feel felt, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
And that someone else who loves God knew what it felt like to lose so much and struggle that bad.
Yeah.
So things like that really helped me. Certainly, without a doubt, it helped to bond with a spiritual community, having my church friends around me. And even that, I had to be selective because not everybody in the church really could understand what I was going through. And sometimes people who meant well would say or do things that were actually very hurtful and damaging.
Yes. Finding those safe people. Yeah. We got to find those safe people. Yes.
So I really had a time of that, and that had its own trial and error to really figure out who could kind of handle this and figure out how to censor what I was saying, you know, relative to who I was talking to.
Right.
But definitely clinging to the fact that, to me, it's very much a fact that God really exists. The spiritual world really exists.
Yes.
And understanding that and holding on to that anchored me, so that even when I felt like, but God was not being loving right now, and he wasn't understanding, this was too much for me to handle. And maybe
no matter what his Bible said, yes, this is too hard.
Like, the Bible says that, but this is too much.
I disagree with you, God. I know.
And no matter, I mean, and it hurt, you know, it did. But it's like, there was a part of me that realized that even if he was so-called not seeing it or unkind towards me, it still didn't make him not God. He was still God, regardless of what my evaluation of him was, or my experience of him was at the time. And so it helped anchor me, and it helped me really work through, cry out, pray out, scream out, whatever I needed to. And as time went on, I got more and more I kept asking God for resources. And so eventually one thing kept leading to the next. I met Kim, and that was a lifesaver for me. Really. It made me feel less insane in a world that felt so upside down. Going to purity workshops, reading self-help books, reading Christian ones. Throughout, I got therapists, couples therapists, individual therapists, Christian therapists, non-Christian therapists, psychiatrists, everything.
Right.
That I possibly could to give myself the tools that I needed, the momentum and the energy that I needed to really work through it and not get stuck in those dark places.
Yeah. Well, and you know, what's even more challenging is it's hard enough to do that, to just work on ourselves in the midst of all this. But then when you have kids and they're trying to figure out what's going on with mom and dad, and why is daddy not here, or why are mom and dad yelling all the time, and kids tend to, you know, especially when they're younger, they're very self-centered, and so they always think, what did I do? You know, what's wrong with me that mommy and daddy are doing this? And to try to help, even when we try to protect them, or we think we're protecting, they still see things, they still get stuff. And so, you know, what kind of personal challenges did you have with your kids in the midst of all of this?
Oh, tons of them. You know, and some of it is really heartbreaking. You know, it would tear my heart apart to hear my daughter say, for instance, you know, well, why did you have to say something to daddy? Why couldn't you just let him be? You know, and I would think to myself, what is she learning here? You know, I felt like I realized she was learning that it wasn't okay to have boundaries and needs, you know, and I thought, my gosh, what am I teaching my daughter?
Right.
You know, here I'm thinking I'm doing the right thing spiritually by holding my tongue, you know, and then in the next frame, so to speak, my children started to speak to me in the ways that he would, ways that were disrespectful and abusive.
Right.
and disproportionate to,
Yeah.
you know, to not keep using the word abusive, totally disproportionate to the situation. And when I started to see them mistreating me too, it was like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
you know, it's bad enough I have to deal with this man and learn how to navigate that and still be a Christian.
Yeah.
To now have to see it in my children was just devastating to me.
Yeah.
And then when we separated, it just broke my heart. You know, one of my daughters said, well, now who's going to be with me? Now I'm alone. And it was like, what?
Oh.
It was like, what does that even mean? It was so hurtful to me to see her pain and feel her pain. One, because I felt like, well, am I chopped liver? I'm right here.
Right. I'm still here. I haven't gone anywhere.
But in her heart and mind, that's what it triggered her to feel. So I kind of had to sit with that and let her, you know, express herself.
Yeah.
So things like that were really challenging. You know, there were lots of symptoms or consequences in them. You know, they became they're girls and they're already somewhat dramatic and emotional and passionate, but they just took it to a whole nother level. The frequency of their fighting with each other especially went up. The drama level or intensity of that fighting went up. Their felt need to know everything. You know, well, if we're going to go to church at what time and in what car and in what way and when are we going to come home, and when we come home what are we going to eat, and you know, they felt the need to know all these things, and it was very hyper, and the need to control things that, you know, were minute in the grand scheme of things. And their grades went down significantly. And I think that was really rough. You know, both girls, thank God, are very academically inclined girls. They were always just naturally very good at, you know, learning and doing well at school. So not one, but both, you know, went from, you know, mid 90s, you know, in their grade point average, you know, the lowest score I think any of my children ever got was like a 92, to all of a sudden now there's 74s and 76 and 73. And I'm like, what? You know, that's a 20-point drop. That's 2 levels down, you know, and no real reason or no identifiable reason on the outside. Obviously, psychological reasons for what they were going through on the inside.
Yeah. Well, now, I mean, you know, we said that we would think that you would have an advantage being a counselor when this stuff happens, and it's like, what? But in some ways you did have an advantage, and I know you and I have talked prior to this that there were certain things that you realized in your counseling education and your experience that you actually had tools that you didn't realize that you had. So how did you incorporate those tools? You know, explain the tools first, and then we'll talk about how you incorporated them into your parenting.
Well, one thing I found really helpful was to think about how we have 5 aspects of ourselves. All of us do. So there are different aspects of ourselves, and one of those is the physical aspect, obviously, you know, our body. And
if you like, I'll put up that graphic so you can see that. Yeah, so we have the graphic up, and you can see the different aspects here. So maybe you can explain that to us.
Yep. So basically, one thing that I was aware of is that we can achieve peace, happiness, flow, if you will, when we're attending to all aspects of ourselves. And so there are these 5 aspects of ourselves, and understanding that helped me have a framework, I guess, for how to have a path back to finding that happiness and balance for myself and my children. So physical is one, relational. So that's the relationship dynamics between 2 people. The personal, which really you should say persona, but they all seem to end with L, so we put personal.
Right.
But that basically means your personality, like the things that are particular to you. And then emotional, the emotional aspect of ourselves. And at the center of all of that is the spiritual aspect, because our spirit is a real thing. And, you know, and all what that means for each of us. So understanding that just kind of gave me a framework, a groundwork to go off of, and try to pay attention to which aspect of this aspect of me is not in balance that I need to work on. And then when it applied to the children as well, to think about what aspect of their self seems to be more off the rails than the others.
Right. Yeah. And I remember you saying that big life events, like their dad, you know, your parents having these major arguments, so your dad not being like, these kind of tip those things off balance sometimes, correct?
Yeah, big things will tip all of them, basically. Whereas if you're dealing with an everyday life issue with a toddler, they might be really hungry or really tired one day, so that's their physical aspect that'll interplay with the emotional, but it's not all five.
Right.
But when you have some big significant emotional events, they'll send all five sort of flying. It's like putting a bowling ball through all aspects of yourself, and that can make it a lot harder, or take a lot longer, be a lot more of a process in order to kind of pull them back together again and find a realignment, for sure.
Right. Yeah. So like, I'm just going to throw in an example there. Like for us, you know, all five of these aspects, obviously when our spouse betrays us, you know, it definitely affects us relationally, because it throws a monkey wrench in our relationship. The trust is gone. Personally, we start doubting our identity. We start doubting our worth. You know, I don't know this person anymore. Like, who am I then? Especially if we've misplaced I value and identity in our spouse rather than in God. It affects us emotionally, because we start, like you were saying, questioning our sanity and just the emotions that go along with that distrust, the anger, you know, the sorrow, the grief, the bitterness. And then even it affects us physically, where we can get physically sick. I know I lost like 20 pounds in like 6 months when my husband and I first separated. Some ladies actually put on weight. I lost weight. I had no appetite. And we can not take care of ourselves. We cannot eat. We cannot get the proper exercise or not get enough sleep. So it affects us that way too. But I think spiritually it's huge. And I think like these kind of things also reveal spiritually where the imbalance has been in our lives, because sometimes we can be so focused on our relationships, or we can be so focused on one of these aspects that we actually neglect the spiritual side of us. And so these big events can actually expose that we haven't been focusing the way that we need to spiritually, and that for all of those things to be well balanced, that spiritual aspect needs to be there. So now, how did you apply this model with your kids?
So yeah, it really depended, you know. It's still going on, because they're still in my life and existence, and children. So at this point,
how old are your girls?
So right now they are 10 and 12 years old. And so I sort of literally sat down and taught them the 5 aspects of self about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so I literally teach them from it. And then now as they go through struggles, I can kind of refer back to it and ask them, well, which aspect of yourself was out of balance? And what about it? So if they're telling me something in school that happened, then it might be the relational aspect with a friend.
Right.
And so on and so forth. So it kind of gives us the framework to come back to. And actually, when I introduced the framework to the children in a literal way this time, it was in the context of talking to them about sex and their bodies, because I felt that it was really important at this point for them to really hear that from me.
Right.
And it really helped them be able to kind of swallow the series of lessons without it being so overboard awkward, though I had to deal with that too with them. So now at this age, it's more direct. When they were younger and all of this kind of started coming to a head, we've been divorced for a year now, but we were separated for almost 4 years before that. So prior to that, I hadn't taught it to them directly, but I was aware of it myself. And so it's kind of the question I would ask myself, like, what is it that seems off right now? So it might be, for instance, if daddy missed a time that he would normally spend time with them, then it might be more suspect to me that it's something in the relationship that has contributed to this latest meltdown.
Right.
Because they're missing him, you know, and something feels off in the relationship. It could be that, you know, whatever it was that happened, if they did have time together, upset them emotionally.
Right.
Because unfortunately, again, he still hasn't engaged in a process of repentance. So he is still very, very inclined to kind of only be mindful of his own thoughts, needs, feelings. And even when it comes to the children, he's very invalidating. So if they did spend time together, I might ask, how was your time with daddy? And then I'm hearing, you know, some huge blow up, you know, him coming at them, but guns blazing over something fairly benign for a child. And then I might help them deal with the emotional aspect of that. Like, how did that feel? And what did that make you think about? And, you know, and then I'm helping them process their emotions without, pray God, without judging him or saying anything negative about him. You know, I'll just usually hold, okay, how did that feel? And how can we work through that feeling? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
For the spiritual, all throughout, if anything, that got better when he wasn't in the house. I've had family devotionals with my kids every week, and I still do. And that helps just install and plant, guide, you know, their understanding of God and the Spirit, besides the fact that we stay very connected to our spiritual community. It helps a lot, you know, for them to have friends in the church. And fortunately, unfortunately, there are other friends in our church in their age group that also have separated parents. So that helps them too. So it just, you know, it helped me have a framework in the back of my mind. And then as they got older, now I directly teach them and teach them to sort of self-evaluate with that.
Yeah. And it's really awesome, because I think you're also doing is you're teaching them how to self-regulate. You're teaching them how to look at themselves almost objectively and see, okay, which part of me is off? And there's most adults like in their 40s that haven't figured that out yet. And if we can teach that to our kids, it's almost like, sad as it's like a petri dish in our house. You know, we're like, okay, let's try to get them so they're learning this now, so that when they grow up and they have these other relationships, that they're not going to be sucked into the same kind of vortex that we were. You know, we don't want them to have any kind of codependent patterns, and we want them to be able to see, I'm not being treated the way God expects me to be treated. You know, this is not right. So it's kind of going against those transgenerational habits that we get into. Like, we see this template in our parents, and you're teaching your girls that this is the way that God created us to think. This is the way that God created us to be. And so it's so awesome when we can teach that to our children in an age-appropriate way. And we're there for them to go, Mom, I was thinking this. Is this the right way to think? And then you can continue that little tweaking, you know, the little guiding of their little brains, but moving them in that healthy direction. It really builds maturity, because they're going through challenging times, but you're giving them that framework to grab onto, to understand themselves. And I think that's really, really powerful. Well, we had a few people that asked some questions. We threw a poll out there on Facebook, and we said, you know, ask us some questions. So I'm going to throw some of these questions out there, and we're going to call the professional to step forward here, and Miss Natalie, to see if we can help some of these ladies figure out how to help their kids. So the first question we have is, I've been separated for over a year. My 3 boys, 8, 10, and 17, don't know about their father's infidelity, but are feeling abandoned by him. How do I help them deal with that abandonment and with imitating their father's destructive patterns at home and at school in the midst of my own need to heal?
That was very layered. But I'll try to remember the key things. So them feeling abandoned is a normal feeling. That's exactly what anyone would be feeling when someone walks away from the way that the relationship has been. So start by understanding that, as opposed to saying, well, you're not abandoned. He still loves you. He still shows up at your concerts. And, you know, which is the knee-jerk reaction, you know, to kind of present the contradicting data, like, well, he's still here if he is. And in my case, he was still, and he is still, a present father. So it was particularly hard when my daughter would say things that would indicate that she felt abandoned, because it's like, I wanted to almost argue, like, what do you mean? You see him more now than you ever did before, and he shows up to all the same things. But their feeling is their feeling. And so you really have to validate that and understand that's their perspective. And the more that you validate, which is really going to be the key for all of these answers and for all these questions, the more that it sets the stage for them to keep processing and being open at the different layers and levels that they have.
Right.
So that's the abandonment. As far as how to shape your child's behavior to try to interrupt the pattern, I think that was the second half of the question.
Yes.
That they might be repeating. That is a tough one. And I have to say that that's something that I'm still actively dealing with. Again, I'm a mom, you know, my children are still children. And so, you know, the most damaging thing I see them repeating is it's sort of that emotional abusiveness, really, the insensitivity, the, you know, mocking the other one for crying or feeling hurt, the invalidation, all of that. All I can tell you is I take a collective deep breath every time I see it. And I try to, in that moment, help them deconstruct it and figure out different words. So a common one in my household, which probably happens every day, is, she's being mean. She's so mean. And I have to interject pretty much every time still at this point and say, how does that make you feel, Phoenix? And Phoenix can go, well, it hurts my feelings. Okay, so then go back and say, it hurts my feelings when you mock me for losing the game, you know, whatever the situation was. And so I literally teach them emotional intelligence in the moment as much as I can by having them self-reflect. So you have to catch them, basically, when you see your son or your daughter doing whatever it is that you know in your mind's eye is going to lead down this pattern, this path of addiction or overindulgence or emotional disregard. Whatever it is, as you catch them doing it, you're not going to go, oh my gosh, he's going to become a liar or an abuser or an addict or, you know, but try to calm yourself and realize, okay, but right now there's a teachable moment, essentially, an opportunity to basically say to your child, okay, let's really think about how to handle that differently or how to see this differently. And you offer the frameworks in those moments. And more importantly than anything, again, you calm your own center from going to the most extreme thing that you might be afraid of.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
Yeah. And, you know, I was thinking how that even is training your kids, like even the way you described it is like, how are you feeling? And then being able to communicate, when you do this, I feel this, instead of you made me feel this way. That helps them to own their feelings, that other people don't control how they feel. They can choose to own their own feelings. As adults, we have to learn to do that as well. And then I was also thinking about in Deuteronomy, you know, the Shema, or the Shema, as they call it in Deuteronomy chapter 6, where God was basically teaching the parents how to pass on the knowledge to the kids. And in verse 4, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And these commandments that I give you are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. You know, write them on the door frames of your house." And that it was so much God's intention that we learn how to make these healthy choices by having these conversations with our kids. And I love what you said about that teachable moment is, you know, sometimes we have to just recognize, okay, I have to stop everything. There's nothing more important right now than me having this connection with my kid, because this moment will pass. If I don't take it right now, this moment may pass and I'm going to lose an opportunity to teach them something really important. And so I love that idea of, when you see that, is recognize that and then make the time. And it may not be right in the middle of all of their emotions. Like, I know my girls do better when I talk to them at night after they've kind of calmed down. And then we'd come back to it, you know, a little bit later and like, remember when you were feeling this way? What were you thinking? You know, what was going on? Because they can be a little bit more distant from it then. and that helped them to not be so much dragged into the emotions, but they could look on it more, more objectively. So yeah,
definitely.
awesome. All right, the next one. My teen daughter knows about her father's sexual sin and shut him out of her life. Actually considers him like a pervert. He is repentant and doing everything the counselor advises him. I shared with her everything I'm learning from my own recovery, but I feel she's too immature to fully understand her parents' mistakes and their need to forgive as well. What else can I do to help my daughter?
Definitely move more towards validating, and less about correcting or even evaluating that she's too immature. You might be right that she may be too immature, but that's not going to help you figure out how to help her. Right. Because where she is right now is where she is right now. And so the more that you kind of, the three things to keep in mind: validate, empathize, and direct. So validating that, some of the things he did are disgusting. And I get how you would feel that way, because disgust, by the way, is a core emotion. Anger, sadness, all of these things, including disgust, is a core emotion. So if she feels it's disgusting, don't try to talk her out of it. That's her feeling, and you have to validate that's how she feels about it. So validating that, and then empathizing. There are times where I also feel like I just want nothing to do with either him or whomever, or there are different times in my life where I felt so turned off, so disgusted, so that I wanted nothing to do with whomever or whatever it is. I get that. I totally do. So you stay with the empathy, like validate, I empathize. And then what to do differently, or what to do with that emotion is, and then I really think about, what does it really mean to kind of do that? Like, I could feel that way. And there are times I've had to take some distance from whoever it is. But then I really think about, I know that I haven't done the kinds of things this person has done, but I know that I've done things that are wrong, and I know that I will do things that are wrong. And do I want God to treat me that way? And that usually helps me kind of come back around to, okay, I can still dislike this behavior and not accept it. And still be okay in my heart of hearts with this person. Because it's just not healthy for me to hold on to that negative energy in my heart towards someone. And whatever might be disgusting to me about them, God or someone else can find disgusting something about me. And how do I want them to treat me is how I have to think about having space in my heart for that. But that's how I work through it. I don't know how you will. So you say that literally. I'm just giving you an example of how I worked through it for me, whether that was about him or other things in my life, so you validate, you empathize, you direct. You don't tell her that's what she needs to do with herself. You just kind of own, this is what I've done that has helped me. I don't know what'll help you, but this is what's helped me. And you just kind of plant it. You're just planting, you're sowing, and you're letting her think about it. The second you start to tell her, this is what I did, therefore you should do that, you're going to get
run into problems. Because everybody's got to kind of own their own way. I love being able to really look at God's heart. We've been going through the Old Testament in my church, reading through the Old Testament, and like reading it from this side of, betrayal recovery, and seeing just what a mess that the Israelites were as they were coming out of Egypt, and just ungrateful. And, God would say, just be faithful to me, and they would blow it. I mean, again and again. And God was always there. I mean, he would admonish them, he would discipline them, but he was always there. It was like he constantly was forgiving his people, and he knew that they would fall, and yet he would still be loving. And that's so challenging to me personally, not just because I'm a sinner, but because that I want to imitate the heart of God as well, that God is so compassionate, and that, everybody's going to hurt us. I mean, everybody's going to hurt us. And so we have to have that heart of forgiveness, but everybody's on a different plane, especially children, how to work through that in a healthy way, understanding the difference between trust and forgiveness. because
Yes.
there's a huge gap between those. And sometimes we can confuse those, but we can still forgive somebody. We can still forgive a parent when they've done that to us, but it doesn't mean we necessarily trust them again. And it's going to take a little bit more work for them to get to that trusting point. But yeah, excellent.
Yeah. And that reminds me also, it's good to look up the difference between forgiveness and redemption, because forgiveness is what we're doing with what our feelings are in the inside. We're releasing them.
Mm-hmm.
That is what it really means to forgive, but that's not the same thing as redemption. So as a case in point, I have forgiven my now ex-husband
Mm-hmm.
for all that he has done, but he has not redeemed himself before God or to me.
Right.
So we have no existing real relationship at this point.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but I've still forgiven because I've released it. Doesn't mean he's off the hook. He still has his own issues to work out. So you teach as it comes up, and you normalize, but you definitely refrain from correcting. And I taught.
That's good. I love what you were saying as far as you let it go, and it teaches you, when you are that example for yourself, you teach your kids that this huge burden of I hate them, they're this, this becomes this huge burden on them. And when they learn in their own time to release it, it is an incredible, like you were saying, it's not my burden to carry anymore. I've given that over, and they can continue working on their own healing. They're no longer burdened by that anger and that bitterness. And when you're an example and you're doing that, it helps your kids to see that it's possible for them to do it.
Right. And actually going back to the framework, and realizing if I'm holding on to bitterness or unforgiveness, then I'm holding energetically, something is pulling at my system. And that's going to impact the rest of my system, which then could impact my health, which it did,
right?
And so on and so forth. My spiritual self, it impacts. So releasing isn't about giving the person a pass or making it okay. It's really just, I'm choosing to release this from my system.
Right.
Because it's not welcome here anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to just bring up and encourage you guys to look up 1 Samuel 25. There's an interaction between Abigail and David, and in the interaction, you'll see that everything I just said is there in terms of validation, empathy, direct. So for her, she really validated. First of all, as soon as she heard what was about to happen, she took action. But in what she said to him, she basically joined him. I mean, think about it. She says, look, Nabal is a fool, just like his name, so she really validated and joined,
right.
Where he must be coming from. She took a good guess at what his emotions might be.
Probably related to what she was feeling a lot of the time too, so.
Probably, So she showed a tremendous amount of validation, of empathy, like understanding where he was coming from. He did work hard at protecting the field, and now all of a sudden he wants a little food, and the guy says no. Like, that's tough,
Right.
And she didn't judge him for it. She didn't say, oh, you're so awful, this is so terrible, how will you call yourself a man of God and you're about to kill everybody? She didn't do that. She just kind of said, okay, I mean, I get it, validated it, empathized, and then she sort of helped him channel that into what he could do.
Yes.
And with that energy, and she called them back in verse 28. Mm-hmm. She said, well, think about what God's going to do for you. God's going to have this amazing legacy for you, and da 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 da. So she kind of gave him a place to put his energy and to shift his awareness to what was hopeful and good and right and insane.
Wise woman.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I got the whole VED thing from.
Right.
But go ahead if you want to tell me the next question.
Okay, so next one. My 5-year-old daughter has been traumatized by the conflict in regards to my husband's sexual sin. She always asks for him, and is now very insecure. How do you help your child not imitate the traits of their parents? We talked a little bit about this. Either the betrayed spouse or the addicted spouse, so they repeat the sinful or unhealthy patterns. Okay, so how do you keep your kids from doing that? Like this, I guess, like that insecurity. I mean, I can relate to that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The insecurity is tough to deal with. It's coming from a real place. So again, acknowledge that and know that it's not a quick fix. There's not one cutesy thing you can say, teach, or do that's gonna make her magically feel secure forevermore. It's an ongoing process. So as you have opportunity to do, you might lay out certain thoughts. For instance, I've believe, and therefore I've laid out the thought in different ways, that we are not our bodies. You know, we are spirit first. And therefore, when people talk about death, death is a concept. What really dies? Death is the death of a physical person, but the person hasn't really died. Their spirit goes on, it changes form. But I explain this in the context of this because it's sort of similar with him leaving, let's say, or not being there. There's a part of him that's always there, you know, just like a part of whoever we've ever bonded with is always here. They may physically leave when they physically die, but a part of whoever is gone is always with us. And their father might still be alive, so it's not quite as, you know, black and white as that. But even when he's not there, or even when mommy's not here and you're in school, there's a part of me that's always with you because we're bonded, right? We have this relationship and we have this energetic connection. So a part of mommy is always with you and a part of daddy is always with you. And you can keep laying that out as many times and as many ways as you can come up with and as opportunity allows. It'll help her to form a secure attachment, you know, a sense of you exist even when you're physically not in front of me, you know, that kind of a thing. And it helps her wrap her mind more around, you know, again, existing and presence being more than just physical.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you know, with a 5-year-old, their faith is huge, you know, especially if, you know, they've been going to church, kids, Jesus, that's why Jesus said, you know, imitate the faith of the children, because they have this incredible faith. And you can even start with them that young, is that mommy and daddy are here, you know, that we're always going to be there with you. That's not even just the physical stuff, but that God is right there too. And even if you're at school and I'm not actually physically there, God's still there, you know, and helping them to, you know, even at such a young age, to realize how precious that they are to God, that he's never going to leave them or abandon them, that he's always going to be there. And he's like our mommy and daddy too, you know, he's like our parents' daddy. And so we can really find our security in them. And then as the children age, helping them to mature in that mindset, so that when they're, you know, in their teens or a little older, they're able to transition from their parent being the person that they need all that security from, that they're actually able to transition it to God in heaven. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Last question. How do you help, this is a biggie, how do you help a suicidal child who is triggered by their father's abandonment?
Definitely a biggie. I have to say, even though you know this already, that always take it seriously. I'm sure you know that. Yeah. Always take it seriously, because it really is a reflection of a breakdown in something in the person's mind's eye. We are pre-programmed, if you will, to survive. So our survival inscription, if you will, is core. And so when something is telling us in our mind's eye that our survival is threatened in some way, or we want to end it, then something is off in that process. Right. So always take it seriously. It doesn't mean that the person is going to move forward and actually act on it, but it is still a serious thing to have their mind's eye go there. So they're in a great deal of pain, where they truly feel that that life isn't worth living, or that some aspect of who they are is dying. And I think you can validate the pieces that are real. So you can say, you know, what is true is this really hurts. What is true is that this is devastating, or really sad, or whatever word you think, you know, fits the situation. And what is true is that a lot of things are changing, and sometimes we don't like the things that are changing, and that really hurts. And, you know, and just from a human development perspective, for a moment, just know that, you know, when we're born, we it's a traumatizing experience to leave the womb in and of itself. You know, we're like, oh my God, how can I survive? You know, it's like
that's why we cry when we first come out. Yeah.
We cry, and it's like, oh my gosh, how am I gonna live and survive in this cold world? And I'm not attached to my food source now. And you know, and so the first people that we attach to tend to be our parents. And it gives us the security of, okay, I can survive. You know, because we form that attachment and we realize they show up with the milk, and you know, so on and so forth. So, you know, it's very real, you know, for a child to feel like they're going to die in a literal sense, even though that's not rational at 5 years old necessarily, or whatever age they are. It triggers that belief and awareness, because the rule became, I'm going to survive if I have this person and this person. So now that that person is no longer there, it feels like I can't survive. And that is real. So again, validate what is true, what is real. Teach it in whatever language is age appropriate for the child, so that they know you really get it. And then shift them. I can understand. Again, so that's the validation, then the empathy. I have felt that way too, certainly with this situation with him, as well as at different points in my own life, maybe share something that's relative. So empathy, and then direct. And what we do know, what I have learned and realized, is that even when it feels like life as I know it is over, and maybe it is as you know it, it's over. But then something else happens, something else changes, and a new sense of self or life or being emerges. So I know those are fancy words to use for a little child, but you know, that's the idea, and you can kind of gauge the right language or idea age appropriately.
And I think that, you know, I mean, obviously when we hear our child talk about anything like that, where you know, their own life, and they're talking about their life, and you know, our nature is to just kind of flip out, you know, it's just like, oh my God, you know. But I think it's so important that we don't let our fear keep us from getting our children help, you know, because if they say something like that, we just, you know, we don't want to just kind of hush them up, or like you're saying, that just this whole idea of validating their feelings is huge for them. Because if we don't validate their feelings now, that they're going to grow up into adults that don't think their feelings are important. And so if we can do that, it's super helpful. But then also to make sure that, you know, recognizing, I mean, you're in a sense, you are at an advantage that you have some of those counseling things, so you can kind of help them. But I'm sure that you probably even had your girls in counseling, you know, so they have their own counselor to help them work, because they need, you know, it's always good for them to be with somebody that's not their parent to talk about certain things. And that to really encourage parents out there, you know, especially if your kids are really, really having a hard time, to make sure that that you can at all possible get them some counseling, get them to where they can talk with somebody that's not you, that is a professional. If it's possible, if you can get them in there with a Christian counselor, do that. But just to help the kids learn how to balance this counseling and this biblical truth, because they really do go hand in hand. And did you want to comment on anything on that, Natalie?
Absolutely. And again, to your point, yes, you know, I'm very grateful for the things I do know about human behavior and psychology. And even so, my kids still go through it. They still have been through it. They did have therapists at different points, more play therapy oriented when they were younger, and all of this kind of came to a head. And now the older one has a therapist. As a matter of fact, Crisenda's been helping her, if you guys have met her in this group, to really unpack and release some of the bigger events that she had a lot of energy attached to. So I'm not shy about getting help for myself or them. It's really important. And I also realize that even though they're getting professional help, it's always going to be me. Like, ultimately, I'm the one that's there, you know, in the 24/7 sense of the word. So I don't hide behind, okay, I'm just going to take them to therapy so the therapist deals with it.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm aware that it can't just be me. So I do have therapists involved at different ages, stages, places, points.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important for all of it, you know, and yes, to your point, it's really important to stay calm and centered, even if they give you big woozies, like I want to kill myself or I'm going to go do whatever it is.
Yeah.
But
Don't
take
react.
it always seriously.
Don't react.
Get help, get support.
Yeah.
You know, I'm here. Yeah, I'm sure, again, some of you might have met Crescenda. I'm also here. I do therapy online, even now, more so than ever before.
Right.
I definitely have a telehealth platform set up if you want individual therapy, either for yourself or for your child to some extent. I deal with children directly, and to some extent not. It just depends. So you can always contact me.
Yeah,
and
I'm going to put this on the screen right now so you can see this. This is Natalie's group. It's Exodus Synergy. And you can contact her on Instagram there, or you can actually email her at natalieludwig@gmail.com. So, you know, she does do online counseling as well, so you don't have to be in the same city. So that's really great. And Natalie, is there any last thoughts that you want to have before we kind of close out here?
Just to say that, you know, I realize that I suppose there's a lot of reasons why people hesitate getting professional help. I know for me, for a while, among them, it was that it costs, it's money, it's expensive. And it's real to do arithmetic and have finances. But I'm also so aware of the importance of emotional health and how that impacts physical, spiritual, every aspect of ourselves.
Yes.
And so there were plenty of times, unfortunately, I had to charge it up or do whatever it, you know, and I'm not suggesting that for anyone else. I'm just saying that when you really value and understand that, you know, no matter what else happens in your life or your child's life, like, it's kind of like wherever you go, there you are, you know, you're always going to have your emotional center from the day you're born to the day you die. And so emotional health and well-being is extremely important. And I just suggest that whether you do so by getting professional help, getting self-helpy kinds of things, workshops, I did all of it, you know, the professional help, self-help books, workshops, everything else. Oh, and on that note, I do plan on developing a workshop. If you guys feel it would be helpful, please respond in the Facebook group and let me know that, because I did have a whole lot more to say. But it's a lot for one session. So I was thinking about developing it into a full out workshop, and let me know if you guys think that'd be
awesome.
helpful. And I can definitely
yes. We'll definitely promote it here on Hope for Spouses. And I did want to add too, I think, you know, I know it is really easy for us to get caught up, you know, especially when you have a broken marriage. A lot of times the spouse's finances, like your addicted partner, your finances are definitely tied to them. Sometimes if you're not working a job on your own, your finances are tied to them. And so when all this stuff happens, like, your whole finances unravel. And so we can get so wrapped up in, well, this costs this, but we're not thinking long-term that the investment that we're making in our children and in ourselves to get healthy is going to save us money in the years to come. Like, if we can help our kids now to get centered, to get healthy, we're going to save them thousands and thousands of dollars in their own therapy, in medication, and maybe possibly divorce, because we're investing in their future right now.
Right.
And so I think if we change the way that we think about that, I think that would be helpful.
Exactly. And plus how it actually impacts literally physical health, which I feel like that's the thing I always want to scream from the mountaintops. And feel free to visit my website too, exodussynergy.com. It does give a lot of different little videos and information about things and how emotions relate to health and things like that. And as a closing scripture, I thought it'd be fun to read this one.
Yes, go for it.
As a result of this, he has given you magnificent promises that are beyond all price, so that through the power of these tremendous promises, you can experience partnership with divine nature, by which you have escaped the corrupt desires that are of the world. That is 2 Peter 1:4. the Passion translation, because why not? Passion. But I thought, you know, beyond all price, because it's got to be whatever it takes to be healthy, spiritually, emotionally, physically, has to be the priority. And I love the fact that it says experiencing partnership, because I felt so alone in so many aspects of this. Sometimes I still feel alone in the parenting, because it's the everydayness and the constantness. And then I really have to remember I'm not alone. That's an idea. The truth is that I'm completely partnered, and I'm not the single parent. I'm completely partnered with my true husband and the father of my children, which is God, exactly. Constantly guiding me, and certainly my whole army of community and network that I have built at this point.
Yes. Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much, Natalie. We're so grateful that you're able to share your personal experience and your professional, all of that together. I just want to appeal to you ladies to really even take this whole mindset that for you to really invest in your own healing. You know, you have to be the buffer for your parent. Your kids are only going to imitate what they see in you. If you're setting a healthy example for your kids, getting yourself healthy, you know, it's like when, you know, we get on the plane and mask, they say, you know, who do you put the mask first on? You put it on yourself, and then you put it on your kids. You can't pour from an empty cup. You've got to make sure that you're getting your own needs taken care of. And if you're in that place where you really want to start dealing with these things in your own life, in your own heart, and you really don't know how to go about that, then I want you to go ahead and schedule a call with me. Okay. It's hopeforspouses.com/call. Again, hopeforspouses.com/call. We'll get on the phone for about 45 minutes or an hour or so, and we'll talk about your specific situation. And I got lots of great resources, Natalie being one of them, for you to get on here and for us to really work as a team to get you the help that you need. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, Natalie, thank you for being here, and we will see you next week on the Hope for Spouses Lunchtime Live. Take care.